This is To Lead is to Learn. In this very special episode, we will be talking to a real-life leader about their experiences of leadership and any thoughts and visions for the future. On today's episode.
Well, the world, is a very different place where your plan is to dominate a country, an organization which is on the brink of failure. And what they have is market domination on the brain. There are different ways of operation, but my team would go nuts if that was an endless flow. That's the polite way of putting it. They think I'm crazy at points and I think they're crazy.
How do you go about dealing with that?
The first order of the day is intense listening. It's not easy in the beginning. It's easy to say, it's very hard to do. There's a personal relationship going on there. There's trust. That's very hard if you feel threatened. That makes perfect sense to me. We don't want to pigeonhole anybody, but they don't have the results to back it up like an exceptional leader. That's not easy to do because the world seeks to distract you.
Without further ado, here is Robert Jordan, the CEO of InterimExecs, and the co-author of the book Right Leader, Right Time. Discover your leadership style for a winning career and company.
My first question is, every leader has a story of how they reached their current level. Can you give a brief summary of yours?
Thanks, Chris. Mine is would be one of the very entrepreneurial ones. I was in graduate school in the US and thought up an idea. This was years ago, before the commercial internet, for the World Wide Web, and dropped out of school to start a magazine, a consumer magazine that talked about online services and the internet. There was a magazine that sold all around the world. The only problem was we were 5 years before the actual launch of the World Wide Web, which, as you know, was invented by one of your countrymen. But so did the magazine for a number of years. When the World Wide Web came around, I could do no wrong, and it put me on a list in the United States of the 500 fastest growing businesses. So started not so well, finished up great, ended up selling it to a big publisher. And then I started taking on a very strange job title in the US, being an interim CEO for early stage tech companies, and eventually formed an organization called InterimExecs, which is a global matchmaker around the world between organizations that have a senior leadership need, a CEO, CFO, CIO, and that's what I do now.
You founded your current organization that you mentioned, InterimExecs, which is described as being leadership on demand. Can you explain what you mean by this and what led you to identifying the need for this sort of an organization?
Well, the world, is a very different place from the way that our parents and our grandparents were employed. It used to be that, you would finish your education, whatever that looked like, and you would apply for a job. And at most companies, you would think, gee, could I be here the rest of my life? There was an idea with large corporations of lifetime employment. And that ship has sailed, right? That ship has sailed around the world. And really the way that work is organized now is much more that you and I, we each have kind of tours of duty, and that in our careers, we're going to have many different experiences. And so that same logic has hit the C-suite, has hit leadership of companies around the world, which is not only what led to the rise of this idea of leadership on demand, project-based leadership, but also led us through research, because we've been approached by about 7,000 executives from 50 countries. And so over the years, we developed ranking and scoring and screening to come to this idea of what does the top 1 or 2% of leadership look like? And I know we're going to talk about that about this. That's what led to publishing a book called Right Leader, Right Time.
Through your time, what's the biggest challenge that has been faced by leaders within organizations?
Sorry, Chris, could you repeat the beginning of that question?
So within your time working with organizations under InterimExecs, what has been the biggest challenge faced by leaders that you've seen?
Well, we receive phone calls from organizations around the world that face a myriad of challenges. Some of these are pure crisis. An organization which is on the brink of failure, and perhaps it's too late, but they need help, and they finally come to a decision that they're going to take on an outside resource. In most cases, I would call it more of upside, fueling a need that someone has developed a new product or service, and the current team just doesn't have enough firepower to fully capture the opportunity. But everything you can imagine that occurs in business, we get those kinds of phone calls.
I mean, how do you go about navigating one of those? Let's say that they don't have enough firepower, as you said, within their leadership team. How do you go about dealing with that?
Well, if you want to take an example, say a company, for example, has a new product to launch, and the team has not done that before. The advantage to the modern world, the way things are organized, as you and I are recording this, is there are now these resources, these executives who've had these remarkable careers and track records in more traditional employment, right? Working for large companies where they've had a lot of success. They're not retired, but they got a little bored, and they don't need the corner office for the rest of their lives anymore. They're not driven so much by money anymore. It's not this need for a paycheck every day. It's this drive to quickly kind of hit the ground running with an organization that has a need. So you have this kind of executive talent, which is now out there. For example, one of our executives, he's the former president of Pepsi. And so, you have organizations that are launching new consumer products. And if they've never had that experience of, gee, how do you do something where your plan is to dominate a country, right? You have a new beverage, you have a new food product. How are you going to do that if you haven't done it before? Well, it could be that expert leader coming in on a project basis, not applying for a job, not going to be there permanently, but that a project can be defined so that you have that opportunity, that potential for more success faster. I can give you an example. Examples on the other side of disaster are all around us. As you and I are recording this, Chris, crypto has gone through an implosion. And the leading example, the leading marketplace, FTX, filed for bankruptcy about 3 months ago. And immediately on filing for bankruptcy, and that involved about 100 entities, the US courts appointed an interim CEO. And now that was in the case of someone who was veteran at crisis. And it's not a surprise that the credentials of that CEO going into FTX, prior to that, he'd been involved in Enron, which was a huge blow up of an energy trading company. But that was the wiring of that executive to go in and be that kind of resource on the spot as needed.
That's interesting. That sort of leads me on to my next question, which is, what do you look for within your sort of leadership team at InterimExecs when you're about to place someone? What sort of skills, knowledge, experience do you actually look for? Is it specific to the role, or do you have just a team and you have already selected these people before you get a job that comes along?
Chris, it's a great question. It used to be, and this phenomenon of interim executives, project-based or fractional executives, exists all around the world. It used to be more undifferentiated, which is to say that an expert leader could go into a variety of industries and roles and be successful. And while I still believe that is true, because this is matured as its own category. It's not the same as permanent search. It's not the same as consulting. We do see more specialization and in some cases getting very specific. So if you think, for example, in any country of a regulated industry, where there's more government control around it, that tends to require more specific industry expertise from the executive coming in. So for example, in most countries, insurance is a highly regulated offering. And so if, for example, an insurance company shows up, they're going to need somebody who already had background, already understood how to deal with regulators. But in a lot of categories, that's not necessarily the case. And, what we've noticed is that for most executives who are challenged by this, who've had exceptional traditional careers and then go into project-based leadership, they're seeking new industries. They're seeking this kind of cross-pollination to take their experience from one realm and take it into something completely different.
It's good that they're branching out. What sort of transferable skills do most leaders, in your opinion, have that can go from one industry to another industry? What is that they have in their skill set that allows them to move from one industry to another?
Well, the core of their leadership skills is not going to change based on the industry that they're going into. I would say, though, that because, in terms of the research we did for the book, Right Leader, Right Time, we very much differentiate between 4 different leadership styles or forms of leadership energy. We give them labels, which are fixer, artist, builder, and strategist. And so we see those as very distinct kinds of leadership style. And within those styles, there are different ways of operation. So fixer, for example, this is the energy that loves going into the burning building time after time. This is the person who is expert at turning around failing organizations. Well, that playbook, you would think going into the burning building, oh, it's action, action, action. Actually, for most fixers going into companies that are in crisis, the first order of the day is intense listening. And that doesn't mean listening to the board of directors. I mean, it is listening to the board and the management team. But in most cases, companies that are in crisis, they've ignored a lot of people inside their own organization. And so that kind of leadership style, you will see a leader going in, and the first thing they're doing is going down onto the shop floor. They're talking to the people running the equipment, actually making the product. They're talking to the administrative assistants and low-level staff who may have been ignored by management for years. So you'll see that there's a different kind of playbook based on style. If you want to know commonalities, we would say, for example, that exceptional leaders who excel in a particular kind of leadership style tend over time to double down within that style. They tend to reinforce more. If you are wired as what we would call artist leader, standout example in the world today is someone like Elon Musk, who is driven by this creative drive. Artist leaders see the world as a blank canvas or a piece of clay to be molded. If that is your dominant kind of wiring, then what we tend to see is the more confident you become in your career, the more accomplished, the more over time you will tend to reject what is not for your highest and best use. So that's a phrase we use a lot in the book, which is to say that, for each of us as we go through this career journey, it's not easy in the beginning. It's easy to say, it's very hard to do. But that over time, you come to discover yourself more and more, what you love, what you like to do, what you least like to do. And exceptional leaders tend more and more over time to gravitate towards that, to double down within their own particular style of excellence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. In terms of your book then, Right Leader, Right Time, Discover Your Leadership Style for a Winning Career and Company, you said that you have 4 different types of leader. You've mentioned 2, which was the artist and the fixer. In terms of the 4 different types, can you give a quick summary of the other 2?
Yes, so the 4 are fixer, artist, builder, strategist, and for shorthand in the book, we refer to it FABS or FABS. We've also launched a free 3-minute assessment. It's called FABS Leadership Assessment, which is at the website for the book, rightleader.com. So fixer and artist, we talked about. Builder. Now, I know everybody in an organization is a builder. We love being builders. We mean something a little more specific here, which is the kind of energy that can take the small team, small set of client relationships, new product, new service. It's very nascent. It's very new. And what they have is market domination on the brain. They have this fixation with getting to a point of dominance in a market of scaling. And what you tend to see with expert builders is that once they have achieved that, they may get bored. You will see that person and they could rotate off the product, rotate off the team, rotate off those client relationships to go seek out something else which is not yet at scale. Sometimes this means, oh, we're going for world domination. But in a lot of cases, it doesn't. If, for example, in your town, there's a home builder, a real estate developer, and everyone in town knows them, and they're not known in any other towns, just your town, that's a sign of someone who is fixated on market domination. And they've defined their market in a certain way, which is they're going to be dominant there. The final style, strategist, this is the leader at scale. This is the person at a complex or vast or very large organization. And that kind of leadership energy is very different from fixer, artist, and builder. The kind of language strategist leaders use refers to loyalty, to being mentored, to mentoring other people, to being cross-trained in various functions, to longevity within an organization. One of the leaders, we interviewed a lot of leaders for the book, and one of the people we interviewed, she had been the Undersecretary of the Department of Defense in the United States. That's over 1 million people. And to hear the way she would describe leadership in terms of systems and having influence at a level that on the surface you would say, oh, that's just a 1-degree change. But that over time, you could see this massive shift in an organization. That's the kind of language you hear out of strategist leaders. Strategist, we could have called conductor or captain or pilot, but it's a very different energy. You will not hear most fixer, artist, or builder leaders talk in the same way. And in most, if you're identifying more with fixer, artist, builder, it's highly likely you're with a team that has 5 people, 10 people, 50, maybe 100. But there's a personal relationship going on there. There's trust between you, which is how your leadership expresses itself. And for the strategist leader, there's a different set of tools you have to rely on.
Are they all equally spaced, or would you say, because you mentioned there 3 of them appear to be almost grouped together, but strategists, they seem very separate. Is that right to infer that?
Well, we don't want to pigeonhole anybody into saying, oh, you're just this one thing. I don't think that's the case. I think that for a lot of successful, exceptional leaders, there is a dominant style and there may be a really strong secondary. For sure, what I'd say the opposite is not true, which is there is no leader who is perfect in all aspects, companies, cases. It's just not the case. And, Chris, it sounds obvious to say that, but I'll tell you that among the 7,000 executives who've shown up on our proverbial doorstep, the majority are experiencing careers that we would describe as okay, but not exceptional. And if you had to rack that up to one reason, we would say it's because of the attempt to be all things to all people. And it doesn't work. But if you point that out to someone, they'll deny it all day long. but they don't have the results to back it up like an exceptional leader. And by the way, that's another one of the differentiators, which is that exceptional leaders tend to collaborate far better than average leaders. And we think the reason for that is because if you're more confident in your own style and knowing exactly where you are best applied, then it's easier to acknowledge other people around you in their own genius, and to realize that if you're on a team, that's how you're all going to be more successful. That's very hard if you feel threatened or you're not in what we would say your highest and best use. That's very hard to actually collaborate with somebody else authentically and allowing them their genius.
I did your diagnostic myself, and it only took a couple of minutes, and I came out as an artist. So if I was someone that you were working with, what pieces of information or advice would you give to someone like me to maximize my potential?
Wow, that's a great question, Chris, and I'm so appreciative that you took the assessment. And it does not surprise me that you came up with artist as your dominant energy. And again, this is not to say all of us we bring all our capabilities to bear in our work. And if you're a leader in your leadership role, you're using all of your toolkit, right? So in your case, to say that there's this dominant artist energy, that makes perfect sense to me. Because, for example, almost by definition, since you are doing a podcast, that is a creative outlet. That's a creative pursuit. Because you teach physics, it's just something that it is an expression of creativity. It is both rules-based and at the same point, right, there's a part of you, your mind, that takes a concept and keeps on going with it, right? You know, you and I, before we started recording, we were talking a little about quantum entanglement, of all things. And it's just fascinating because even, you know, the great Albert Einstein, he was bothered by it. He couldn't fully wrap his mind around something that did not conform to the way that everyone believed the universe was organized, you know, up until the 1920s, right? So the advice for artists. Well, first of all, the advice for any one of these styles is keep going, keep doubling down. That is hard to do. That's not easy to do because the world seeks to distract you. And especially for young people when they're coming out in career, it's not an overt message so much as something more subtle, which is this idea of commoditizing, and that it's hard to necessarily show genius. I will tell you, Chris, because you and I are wired similarly, I'm a very strong artist. I'm terrific at generating ideas on my team. But my team would go nuts if that was an endless flow. And so what I realize, and the success, for example, of our business InterimExecs is because I'm surrounded by people who have very complementary energies. That's the polite way of putting it. What I say with them, I say, oh my God, we're so opposite. You know, they think I'm crazy at points and I think they're crazy at points, but you need that complementariness, you and I especially, because we can't turn off the creative drive. The way we interviewed a number of psychologists, organizational psychologists for the book to ask, you know, are we crazy? What do you think of this model of fixer, artist, builder, strategist? And one of the psychologists we interviewed, he said, you know, you just need to be spiky in a couple different ways. And we're like, what do you mean by spiky? And he said, well, if you looked at a graph on a screen or a piece of paper and it showed all of the traits and skills and capabilities you need from a team, regardless of what they're doing, teaching in a school, putting out a car, whatever it is. But if you look at across all the range of abilities you need on a team, you and I only have to be spiky in a few certain ways to be accretive and additive to that team. We're not going to be spiky. We're not going to be exceptionally high ability across all traits. That's just impossible. And what that team needs is this complementariness across all these different kinds of spikiness to succeed.
When you're looking at diagnosing someone's strength area, whether it be, let's say, artist or a builder, what is the diagnostic actually looking for when you're answering those questions to help identify which area you're in?
Well, do you mean that in general, or specifically like if a company showed up and said, hey, we're in trouble, we need turnaround, we need a fixer?
If we're looking at a leader trying to self-diagnose themselves using your diagnostic, for example, what have you got programmed into your diagnostic to help identify?
Wow, this is another great question. There's a number of things we are testing for in the assessment. And there are a number of tools in the world that are wonderful, and they're, as the statisticians would say, they're validated. Because they've been used by so many hundreds of thousands or millions of people. We are much more at the exploratory stage here. And so I'll tell you some things we believe that are being tested. Okay. So for example, if you think you're wired strongly with fixer energy, this turnaround, you're always the troubleshooter on the team. You need to go into the toughest situations. We think that's a linear style. Linear meaning that you tackle one company at a time, one crisis, you'll see, for example, in large corporations, they'll put a troubleshooter into a country where they're having the most amount of problems and no one else could solve it. You will tend to see that fixer style, we believe, is linear, which is to say one organization, one crisis at a time. So for example, it wouldn't come as a surprise that the leader put into FTX, right, the crypto exchange, which has blown up, and there are at least 1 million creditors around the world. That CEO is not working on any other project, any other company. He is 24/7 for a number of years going to have to figure out where are the assets, where's the crypto, where's the money, and how to get back as much as possible to those investors. The flip side is, for example, Chris, you and I, we are wired with artist energy. We would say that for artist energy, it's parallel. And we could almost define artists with one question. For any of your listeners, if I ask you the question, do you have to work on more than one project at a time? If you're jumping up and down and saying, yes, I do, you have artist energy in you. Literally, we got that reaction from a number of leaders we interviewed. We interviewed one artist leader, and here's the list of his resume. He had launched and grown a marketing services company with 200 employees. At the same point, he wanted to help Rwanda get over the genocide from 20 plus years ago. And so he had launched an entrepreneur training program in Kigali in Rwanda, and he made a 10-year commitment to go every single quarter, and he had a program training hundreds of entrepreneurs, right? At the same point, he was the chairman of the board of the leading opera company in Chicago, and on and on and on. And when we asked him, do you need to work on more than one thing at a time? He's jumping out of his chair saying, yes, yes, yes. Now, I know of at least 2 things you do, Chris. You teach physics and you do a podcast, or anything else.
I coach football. I run training programs for leadership. So I try and fill my time with all sorts of different things. So this is definitely resonating with me, jumping up and down.
Yeah. So, and so the further message for you is keep going. You need to do this. If there's ever anybody around you or in your life that says, gee, Chris, you really ought to focus more. You should stop doing all this other stuff. You need to ignore that advice forever. There's just something about the wiring of artist energy that needs distraction in order to succeed, that needs to look away from the one canvas to the other canvas at a time. I mean, and pure artists, like Monet, everybody's seen haystacks at various museums. he would work on 15, 20 haystacks canvases kind of at the same point, depending upon how the light was fading, in a sunset. He literally could shift focus and it would become a new painting every 15 minutes. It would require a new canvas.
Going back quickly to InterimExecs, your business, you list integrity and accountability as two values which underpin everything. And in particular, you actually mention it's above commercialism. So why did you choose those particular values to focus on?
Well, this is reminding me, there's the famous author, Elie Wiesel. And, he survived the concentration camps. He wrote a number of books. One of them was called Night. And there's a quote in there from him, which says to the effect of, for each one of us, there is a path. There's kind of one true path for us. And if you know that and you can kind of swear fidelity to it, you're going to have a successful life. And my co-founder and business partner, and we're co-author, Olivia Wagner, and I, part of the reason coming together to grow a business like InterimExecs is this answering this question for yourself of, what do you stand for? What do you stand for? Well, in our case, we realized we were taking on a lot of risk, because when an organization shows up and they want our help, we're writing a contract, but we're not actually the ones doing the work. We're an agent, and the people doing the work, the executives going in, well, you're placing a lot of trust. You're placing trust in the executive. You're also placing trust in the organization that everyone is going to do the right thing. And so it just became for us the most important thing, which is, are we operating with integrity? And are we dealing with people who have integrity, who we can trust? This sounds so obvious, right? Because, everybody thinks, it's, oh, of course I do everything right. Well, yeah, but, you can look in the news on any given day and you can see people who are acting without integrity. Generally, they're getting charged with crimes, or no surprise, something has blown up because they do not honor their word, because they cannot be trusted. And so for us, it just became the absolute rock solid foundation of what we were going to do, that we had to be with people who were in integrity. And I'll tell you, even with that strong foundation and conviction, we have seen breaches integrity, rarely, but we have seen them. And it's not that you can control other people, we can't, but we can control exactly how we respond. And it makes it comforting and gives a lot of clarity to an organization that everyone simply knows this is what we stand for and what we will not. And we had a case with an organization and an executive who absolutely behaved without integrity. And so it didn't matter how much money we were receiving. We fired both of them the same day. There was no question of what we were going to do.
But would you say that integrity is one of your personal values as well as your businesses? It's something that you hold dear yourself?
Yes, absolutely. And this is not, Chris, it doesn't, the example, there's a program around the world called Landmark Education, and they're very big on integrity. And I'll give you a small example. So you and I had set a time to be together for our conversation. And we had that time set, and it was on our calendars, and it's a promise. It's not a big thing, but it is a promise that you and I made to each other, essentially, right? And so the minute comes for us to both get on the call. And if we're both on, and we were both on, well, we've met that promise. And so I'd say we're in integrity on this. Now, had I been late 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever, I'm out of integrity. So I made a promise to you, and that's it. Now, does it mean I'm a bad person? No, I don't think so. I hope it doesn't. But in that case, I'll tell you absolutely what I would do, because I have been late for things. Rarely, but occasionally. What I'm going to do is apologize, because it's a break in a promise that I made, and either to you or to myself and the rest of my team, I'm making a new promise, which is I will be on time early. It's not going to happen again. But, in our lives, in small and large ways, this plays out for all of us in this way.
What other personal values do you hold then, particularly in your leadership?
Well, this may sound a little strange, but I think there is an underpinning of love that comes through, with the people who you are around, in the sense of having this mutual respect and joy and being able to work together. And I'm not going to be involved in organizations and clients and situations where I think that those people would not be, that there are good outcomes that are going to be happening for all of us. Now, with clients, they come and go, and our executive relationships tend to be enduring for years. But I think that, I'm not talking about being unprofessional, but that I think there's this element that we should acknowledge in terms of respecting each other and being in joyful relationships with each other.
How would you say the people who follow you experience this then? So you pointed out that love is one of the things that underpins your leadership. How would they experience that in a day-to-day sort of?
Oh, now I'm gonna sound like I'm bragging, because I have people I work with who'll say I'm the best boss they've ever had. I'm not going to be the guy who's when I was younger and far more insecure in my first company there, I had frantic moments and ordering people around because I had no money and it was desperate and we had to make a profit, and I'm not wired that way anymore. And I'm not going to be that ogre. And if there's and hopefully there's kindness that's going to permeate no matter what. We have staff, and I don't necessarily think it's their highest aspiration that they may be doing what they're doing with our team. I'm going to go celebrate them for doing what they're great at. I have a colleague who's a professional actor. She's a remarkable actor. So I'm going to support her. I see her in every play she's in. I want her to be, a major lead on multiple streaming, shows and on television and all that. That's what I'm going to go celebrate. I'm not going to go insist, because we're in this organization, that she has to embrace what we do, and that's the only thing that's going to go on in her life.
That's really interesting, actually.
I'm not sure that I would say that's a way that I would encourage any other leader to be. But that is, that's what I feel. And we're a private company, though. We're not, I don't know if you get the luxury of that mindset. If you're a public company and you're reporting to your shareholders, and by God, every quarter better be better than the last quarter, I'm not sure they put up with that. But I'm not a public company.
In terms of, you said when you were younger and maybe less experienced, you were a little bit more autocratic and commanding people around. And as you sort of become more experienced, you become less so. Would you say that that's something that's common to most people who take on leadership positions? When they're inexperienced, they're more likely to be autocratic?
It's a great question. I think insecurity breeds a lot of behaviors that, perhaps we wouldn't, necessarily be pleased with. I hope for myself, that, my career journey and leadership journey is one of getting better and better, or put another way, it better be, it has to be, or I'm not learning from it. one of the quotes we put into the book, a minister in the U.S. who, I never knew him personally, had recorded programs, but he had this saying, which is, just because you have a song to sing doesn't mean you don't have to learn how to sing it. So we're each on this journey. We have this mission, and I have daughters, and I will tell them, you're on this great journey here, and it's going to be discovery, and you don't get all of the answers instantly, and you don't necessarily get them early. Hopefully you get them along the way. But that's got to be what the joy of the journey is about. What do you think about that, Chris? I'm going to put you on the spot here, buddy.
I generally think that a lot of people who get put into leadership positions, they see the promotion as the culmination of a journey rather than the beginning of one. And I think they sort of become a little bit too self-centered to start off with. Over time, I feel that they relax into it and they become a little bit more secure, as you mentioned. So, yeah, I definitely do see a lot of that around, definitely.
I mean, clearly from what you have chosen as your career, because you are a coach and you are a teacher, you're absolutely aiming yourself at helping people earlier on to develop and develop well, right?
Yeah. I think one of the things that you actually mentioned there about leadership is you have to continuously be willing to learn. You're always going to improve as a leader, definitely.
A year or two ago, the founder of Salesforce, Mark Benioff, he bought time.com. There used to be Time magazine, and I don't know if they publish a magazine anymore, but it's a big news website. And somebody asked him, why did you do this? He bought time.com for like $200 million. And he hadn't been in the market to become a publisher. And it kind of it sounded like on a whim, he decides to do it. And his answer was, I have a beginner's mind. I thought, that's a great thought. And you can't take anything for granted in business, I don't think. I don't take anything for granted about our business, for example, or the fact that it needs to evolve. And the more that it does, and I'm blessed with all of this remarkable leadership talent around me, from around the world. And I will say, I absolutely want to have a beginner's mind here. I don't want to think, well, because something was this way in the past, this is the way it always has to be in the future. I don't think that's healthy.
So if you were to put yourself in the shoes of your followers when you were inexperienced and experienced now, what would it have felt like to follow your leadership then compared to what it feels like now?
Oh, God help them. My God. I started out as an incredibly enthusiastic but unskilled, ignorant entrepreneur. I mean, the way I put it, I started out in magazine publishing, and I had a great idea. I mean, I was the first person in the world that thought up the idea of publishing around online and internet. But I tell you, Chris, every mistake you could potentially make in business, I made. I ran out of cash. I hired one of my best friends into a role, and it didn't work. And I got to tell you, that wasn't great for the friendship. It was trial by fire, and that was not easy on the people around me.
How did you deal with that? It's interesting. You brought your friend. I think a lot of people would be very tempted to go into business with friends or employ friends into a business. How did you deal with it when it so obviously didn't seem to work?
Well, the full story of that, I mean, if from the outside, like if somebody looks at my resume, they'd see Online Access magazine, and I published it for 10 years. But the reality within it was the first 2 years were so disastrous that at the age of 28, I ended up, we had run out of money, and I was walking into federal bankruptcy court in Chicago, Illinois, not personally, but on behalf of the business, and having to file for bankruptcy. So, try that out at age 28. having aspirations and thinking, oh, this is going to be the greatest thing in the world. But now I'm walking into the clerk's office to file because I've utterly failed in business. So it had no instant great solutions. But I still remember, I remember, walking in and filing. And then for the next week, I held what I call a pity party with exactly one person invited. And after feeling sorry for myself for about a week, I realized, well, we're the only magazine in the world doing this. We had thousands of subscribers. We had national advertisers. It was a real glossy magazine. We had national advertisers that loved it. And around the world, this magazine sold on newsstands a higher percentage, what they call sell-through, than most other magazines. There were a lot of people that when they saw it, they bought it. And that was sobering and encouraging and kind of reviving that I thought, I did get some things right. I wasn't completely wrong here. I was a rookie. I was naive. I'd made mistakes, running out of money, but there was something here. I ended up buying the rights out of bankruptcy court and restarting the magazine, and slowly but surely, without any investor support, building it back up. But there was no instant, easy, oh, this is all I have to do and everything will be perfect. I will tell you that one of the key things is that all the assumptions I made at the age of 26, a lot of them I changed when I relaunched and had to rebuild the team. I had just assumed things that were not necessarily true.
That takes a lot of reflection straight after a really big hit to take your reflection and go, actually, my assumptions I made weren't great. So how would you advise someone to be able to take that moment of reflection and real honest reflection, rather than reflection where we often tell ourselves things we want to believe, but reflection to actually go, what I actually think right now is wrong?
Well, the thing that I inadvertently did at that time is something I try to do every day now, which is to say, start by just breathing. And it was a little after that point, actually, that a friend of mine who was a transcendental meditation instructor, a TM instructor, that I learned how to meditate, which in a way, it's not some huge thing. It's, collecting yourself and just breathing, noticing if you could just get to a quiet place and notice your breathing for 90 seconds. Well, that is essentially the essence of meditation, is to be that observer, to have a point of to try to listen to, as they say, the still small voice in you, that there is a direction we each have. There was something that I was feeling. And so at the point of calm, beyond all of the upset, and I was so upset that, first venture had not worked, was to have this moment of clarity. And even now, to be asked, after the book, because, we've had lots of interviews and people are like, well, what's the key to leadership? All of that. And I will generally say, well, first you have to be at the center. And we had done a book before Right Leader was called How They Did It. It was a series of Q&A interviews with 45 champion company founders, as we said, from the heartland of the US. And one of the leaders we interviewed, he'd grown a company from 3 people to 2,000. And I asked him, how did you do that? And he said, you have to be at the center. He didn't mean a physical, in charge of every decision. He meant the kind of in the core of himself. He had to be grounded. He had to be balanced. And I think that is a key superpower, if you will, especially now, because we are among the epidemics of the world is the epidemic of distraction. And, you don't have to go any further than pulling out your phone, or as the average person does, pulls it out 200 times a day to realize what distraction is and how we're feeding this kind of dopamine hit within ourselves. And that isn't good for any form of leadership. It's not good for any form of I think, a joyful life.
A lot of people say meditation is a real key for success. Are you someone who agrees with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think if people want to look at what can be superpowers for their success, very high on the list has to be get a good night's sleep. That's key more than anything else. And that also high on that list is, you can call it meditation, call it the pause you take every day. If at the beginning of your day or the end of your day, start with 90 seconds to just be in a quiet place and to notice your breathing. Because you will see within 90 seconds to 3 minutes that something is changing inside of you, that the monkey brain, all of that talk and noise we have, it's never going to stop. I'm not saying that, but there is this pause that can occur. I think it was funny, at some point, the Dalai Lama was quoted, because he's the Dalai Lama, right? And boy, he must just be the greatest meditator in the world. And his response was, he's distracted just like anybody else. But there is still this benefit you absolutely can get out of that.
I sort of have that pause, that sort of time just to sit and do nothing. I see that as really important towards creativity, towards all sorts of things. Just the time you sort of clear your mind from all distractions, suddenly that's when the great idea can pop in. You're giving yourself space to actually let it in.
Yes. Yeah. Thomas Edison had a little trick that he would hold some coins or keys in his hand, and he scheduled nap time for himself during the day. And it wasn't, from what I've read, it wasn't so much because he was tired. It was because this calm that would descend when he was sleep, rested, whatever, would be when he was even more fervent with his imagination, and that he wanted to always remember that and record it. It wasn't in the middle of the hustle and bustle.
That's when that's the keys dropping to the floor to waking back up.
Right. So that he could remember in the moment, oh, this is the new idea.
In terms of leading others then, so we've reflected on ourselves, we've identified where we need to adjust, we need to change. Sometimes when leading others, there are difficult conversations that need to take place. How would you advise someone who's worried about those difficult confrontations that they sometimes need to have, the difficult conversations they need to have with someone in their team? What advice would you give them?
I think that what starts with ourselves and then hopefully permeates to the people around us on our teams is this idea of what's my authenticity? How am I appearing genuinely to myself and to the team? And this is where we hope that this new overlay for leaders and people on teams helps, which is to say, to know more about your wiring is meant to be a good thing. That it's meant to be a validation that the unique form of how you are at work and how you lead is a good thing for you, and it's a good thing for everyone around you. Now, if that's the premise that we're really trying to help each other excel on a team or within an organization, well then, Chris, the more I know about you, the better. And the more you know about me, the better, and how I am wired. And so for people who work with you to know of your creative and artistic ability, how that's going to express itself in organization should be a good thing. And likewise, for me to know of the rest of the team, what their wiring is, what their particular genius looks like, is going to help us all perform better. So this gets at the point of what is, more and better authentic collaboration. Because if I can be more confident in my own style, quirky as it is, unique, outlier, whatever you want to call it, But the more confident I can be that this is what I am and this is what I own and this is how I'm going to excel, well, for people on the team to accept me is then also that I can accept everybody else for their unique genius, because they're not going to be the same as me. Even you and I, wired as artist leaders, still means we are, incredibly different and diverse in the ways in which we express that. So I think that conversation and connection is enhanced the more we know about each other in terms of leadership style.
So would you suggest that people within their leadership teams, maybe it's all worth them doing this diagnostic, finding out exactly what type of leader they are, because then they know how to manage the interactions and the strengths and weaknesses of each of the people around them on their team?
Yes, I think everybody taking the assessment is a good idea. I put it into the same category of other activities where we get to know each other. There are other tools, validated instruments that you can take, and they're all going to help for us getting to know each other. And then there are going to be, there are team building exercises that in most organizations people go through, and some of those can be hokey, and but I think in a lot of cases they actually help a team to bond more.
I'm sure out there that a lot of our listeners who are within organizations or have been within organizations that have gone through difficult times. I mean, we've all had one very recently. But during these challenging periods where they might be high staff turnover, for example, if there's a leader right now listening that's going through this period within their business, it's difficult times, it's not as easy to make money, they've got high staff turnover, they're finding it hard to employ people, what pieces of advice would you give to someone who's going through a really tough challenge at the moment, leading an organization?
Well, part of the beauty of the modern age is that there's an abundance of resources around you. And if you're anywhere in the Western world, there are resources around you. And even if they're geographically, physically not close to you, they're one Zoom call away. We represent one particular kind of expertise, which is operational leadership going into organizations, which is project-based, fractional, whatever. But there are all of these other categories of resources that you have at hand. So there's a huge category of expertise in the world, which is coaching. And I make coaching as a distinction from what is peer consulting, what is operational leadership, that has incredible value. And so you're a leader in an organization, you have more resources at your beck and call than you probably know. And it doesn't mean that you're going to break the bank having to go budget for those. That is the beauty of the modern age. For people that kind of decry, like, oh, everyone's not a permanent employee anymore, or, we outsource this function to India and this function, blah, 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 wherever. Well, the flip side, the advantage of that is that so much of that firepower is available to you in an affordable way. And it did not exist before. I think that leadership was a more lonely endeavor before, and it does not need to be that way. I certainly felt it was a lonely thing when I was doing my first company and it wasn't going well. And even when things are going well, if you're the solo leader of a business, it can feel lonely. I mean, that was one of my big motivations where I thought, man, this whole idea of project leadership, I want to do it because I think a lot of people out there in leadership roles do feel alone. And they don't need to.
One of the big changes that's happened, particularly since the COVID pandemic, is moving online, more virtual work, people working from home and therefore not in the office. That can provide some challenges and some level of loneliness, I guess, in terms of a leader. You can't just walk around the office and talk to members of your team. So how do you feel like that challenge is being faced in the modern world?
I think there are some changes that have become permanent as a result of COVID. For example, we in our business, we're now completely used to the fact that our conversations are always now going to be on Zoom calls or, Teams or, whatever tool you're going to use. That wasn't an assumption we all had prior. Prior, a lot of people would be thinking, well, you have to get on an airplane for certain kinds of meetings or events, or we're going to do conference calls. But it's interesting that now, because video is 100 times what it was before, that we have a little sense of more body language and meeting people, which I think can be a plus. I don't think it's a replacement for people being together in person. I miss the fact that when our team is spread out all over the place. When we used to physically all be in one office, it was easier. We want to brainstorm, we're going to go in a room and start covering whiteboards with notes and all that. So I think that there is a hybrid, which we've all now come to accept, and this is the way that it is. And it does have advantages. I say that somewhat reluctantly because I need people. And when COVID hit, and I was in a WeWork location in Chicago. I've also been in WeWorks around the world, but I was in a WeWork in Chicago with 100 people on my floor. And the day that Chicago, kind of put itself into its own form of quarantine, went down to about 2 of us for the next 6 months. It was not fun.
In terms of online meetings, and you in particular, you said you need people. I'm sure there's a lot of people that need that physical connection with people. If someone, for example, is working from home, that really starts to then challenge the work-life barrier, really, doesn't it? Because it's, when do you choose to clock off? When do you switch off? Where's your commute home to defrag from work? That goes away. So that's the challenge, particularly for leaders who, for example, maybe have had a whole day of difficult conversations, and then suddenly their commute home is walking out of their office door straight into their home. How would you advise a leader for that challenge?
It's a great question, Chris, and a lot of there's been research that when COVID hit and people started all working remotely, that productivity went up. And so that was an instant kind of positive. But to your point, that separation between work and the rest of your life became blurrier for people who were constantly working from home, where they had been used to an office. And I think that is a necessary separation that is there. And what it means is there's more of a burden or responsibility on the individual to put some rituals in place to make sure that occurs. And I can tell you, for example, I have a ritual, which is in my spare time, I paint, and I'm blessed with family and lots of activities. And so, for example, on a Friday night, when I'm done with work and I want to make sure I'm not working the rest of Friday and I'm not going to work over the weekend, I have a bit of a ritual to shutting down my PC, my laptop, which is every app has to be closed, and I'm not going to be looking at email over the weekend, and I'm not going to look at it on my phone. And I just know, and it's a comfort to me, that on that Friday afternoon, whether I'm at home or I'm at the office, that I go through that shutdown. I tell myself work has shut down, and that's it until I get back to Monday, whether that Monday work is at home or in the office. I'm a big believer in ritual. We need structure. We humans, we get our freedom out of structure, not the opposite.
In terms of organizations then, and looking into the future, do you foresee any big challenges, big problems that maybe at the moment aren't there, but you can see maybe they're going to be coming soon, and your organization may have to adapt the way that it's going to provide its services in the future, because these are going to become bigger, persistent problems that are coming in the future?
There are potentially all kinds of major challenges that are coming. At the moment, as you and I are talking, Chris, I think AI is first and foremost, and its impact is unknown. It was just about a week ago that about 1,000 leaders called for a moratorium on AI development, concern over where it's going. I have the feeling that it's a little like when television first became popular. What you would see is an announcer on camera, and they'd be reading from a piece of paper like the news. So they hadn't quite made the leap, right? On radio, you couldn't see the announcer, and they would talk, and now they put a camera on him, but he's doing the exact same thing. They hadn't quite realized this medium is different, and it's going to express itself in a completely different way from radio. I feel AI is like that now. ChatGPT has made leaps and bounds, and I think it's already influencing a lot of businesses. Writing, for example, there's been, measured increases in productivity for people who are choosing to use something like ChatGPT or Bard to write a first draft of an article or a grant or whatever piece of work they're working on. But these are just the opening innings.
What do you think is going to be the big challenge to organizations from AI coming out? Is it going to challenge creativity, or is it going to add to it? So what's your feeling?
My hope and prayer is that it's additive. I think in the end, what it becomes is very personalized to you and me and portable. That the way that the AI is developing is such that it becomes a trusted resource for you, and it gets to know you. And so, for example, your AI can know exactly how you like to travel. What airline do you typically like to take, and what car rental, and what's your choice of hotel, and all of that. And so in the sense of being like a trusted assistant or friend, I think it's going to be very helpful in that way. Where it's an unknown, for example, AI is, beyond the web page you and I see, all of the coding for that page is right behind it. You could see it. Well, AI is training off of those billions of pages. And so even right now, the code that is generated by AI is, what most of our CTOs and CIOs would say is the code is excellent. Well, what does that mean if you're a programmer? I don't think it necessarily means you're out of work, but the nature of what your job is absolutely is going to change. I don't think human ingenuity and creativity is being replaced by this. I think we're simply, I hope, going to get a boost in most cases.
I guess it could accelerate the changes that are happening within businesses, where it might free up work and time from some people somewhere, and they can put their energy towards somewhere else.
Yes. And again, I think that this is a challenge for leadership. This is not something where the leader of the organization or the division or the team just gets to look at it and chuckle and say, oh, isn't this cute? You see reporters with these conversations with the AI, and they're somewhat bizarre, what they call hallucinations. That's not the core of what is going on here. I'll tell you, for example, that like the business that we are in, we absolutely are embracing AI as a component of what we do. Because the sheer amount of data around executives is such that, in addition to our team, to having a human staff is, I think it's absolutely a good thing that there is a piece of intelligence alongside that is saying, well, did you think about this? And what about these other people?
It can report back updates. If they get the refresh behind the actual program, they can report back updates very quickly, and it can shift from one week to the next how you might deliver your business, I guess.
It could. I think the business that we are in, because we're mostly dealing with boards of directors and owners of companies, is that the human component is still going to be there. I don't think that's going to change. But as a powerful tool, I think this is revolutionary.
If we were to take your personal journey and we were to look into the future, what do you see for yourself in, say, 5-10 years in terms of your career?
Well, I hope that I am able to do what I do and love to do for the next 20 years. I'm not a person who believes in or is wired for retirement. I don't play golf. I don't want to go play golf. I love doing what I do. I hope I'm of value for a lot of organizations and executives in my own team, and my goal is keep on doing that. And hopefully I'm taking my own medicine, which is to be more and more in my highest and best use, and more to be declining or rejecting what's not for that highest and best use. And I want the same thing for everybody who's around me. I'm not going to push off on somebody else what I don't think is great for them, will cause their genius to come out. Let me ask you that, Chris. Where are you in 5 years?
That's a very good question. I'm hoping to move into some form of leadership coaching position in the future. That's my aspiration, to become a leadership coach, to work in a similar way to you, but work with leaders at all levels and help improve their leadership skill set, their ability in whatever practice they're doing.
That's great.
In terms of your legacy then, so you want to keep working for the next 20, 25 years. Your legacy beyond that, what do you want to leave behind?
I don't know that I'm so worried about that. I think the future takes care of itself. More and more, I've been painting for 30 years. I started having art shows, gallery shows, and so in the literal sense, there's a bit of color that I'm leaving behind me, which I think is a good thing.
In terms of your business?
Well, for the business, I think that we created a concept 10 years ago called the Red Team, InterimExecs Red Team. Red stands for Rapid Executive Deployment. And that's proving to be an enduring brand around the world. So regardless of who owns or is running the organization, I think that's going to be something that's going to endure. And that's a good thing. And I hope that it maintains a consistently high standard for working with people with integrity and having accountability.
It's almost the idea, the approach has been put out there, and that's what you're most proud of.
Yes.
So as a final parting question then, I generally ask my guests, what is the most important lesson or piece of advice which you've learned, which you would give to a young leader just starting out their journey?
Exceptional leaders tend to reject more of what is not for their highest and best use. And so that's easy to say, very hard to do when you're early on in your career journey. I get that. You need the job, you need the money, your family is looking at you, your friends. But over time, as that journey is going on, you can be more and more intentional and more to see where you excel, where you get your joy, how your genius is coming out. And that's what I'd hope for my own kids and for people on their own career journey is to keep on reinforcing what is your own particular genius.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners then?
This has been great, Chris. It's been really an honor to be with you.
Thank you very much. It's been a brilliant conversation.
And until next time, remember,
To lead requires us to continuously